Good day. I'm Norm Willoughby. I'm a content writer for education here at the Illinois Realtors. And today we have with us Paul Brown. And Paul is a certified and licensed residential appraiser here in Illinois. And he has an extensive background in real estate as well. And he's going to help us guide through or set up as a guide for real estate licensees and their interaction and what they can expect from an appraisal during a real estate transaction. So with that, I'll turn it over to you a little bit, Paul, you want to talk a little bit about your background?
Sure. So again, I've been an Illinois licensed appraiser for about 10 years now. I am a certified residential appraiser, so I do not deal with commercial or farm ground or those types of things. Additionally, I work with our local Realtor Association in a couple different capacities and taught courses for Eastern Illinois University for about a decade as well.
Very good. Well, like I said, the purpose of our class today or this course is going to hopefully help the real estate licensee understand the appraisal process and what the appraiser's job is, Paul. I'm going to start off with, what is an appraisal?
Well, an appraisal is an opinion of value. Now that opinion of value is prepared by a state licensed real estate appraiser. And we throw the word opinion in there, which kind of makes it seem subjective. However, when I say opinion, that is well supported by market data.
And you know, I always kind of talk a little bit about that, even when I teach courses about CMAs. To me, CMAs are subjectively objective or objectively subjective. And that's probably the same with an appraisal.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So when and why does my client many times need in a real estate transaction, specifically a residential, why do they need an appraisal?
Well, clients need appraisals for a variety of reasons. Oftentimes, like you said, it's for an assurance of value. So oftentimes in a real estate transaction, it's going to be that lender that orders the appraisal. And they're doing that for several reasons. One, they need an accurate description of that property. And you say an accurate description, don't they have that from the agent or the MLS or even from public record? Maybe, maybe not. Oftentimes there have been improvements made to a home or condition modifications to a home that may not be accurately represented in public record or may not have been accurately represented by the agent.
And I guess it also would serve for the lender in that particular case as a confirmation of the status of the property.
Yep, so an appraisal is an independent opinion of value,
okay,
right? And it does serve as an insurance policy for the lender that is selling that loan or buying that loan, depending on how you want to look at it, for sale to the secondary market. So this home, in this case, or property that they're lending money on, are they sure, right, that if something were to go awry with this mortgage, that they would be able to recoup their investment?
Okay. So once, I guess that's the purpose of why many times. Now, on a cash transaction, you may have a buyer that just simply wants to make sure that the value is there, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Again, just for that assurance of value.
Okay. So then that kind of starts the question of if I'm a buyer or borrower, same person, do I get, and I've gone to the bank and they pre-approved me and they say, of course, we're going to get, it's subject to an appraisal. Does the buyer or the buyer's agent, do they select those appraisers or how does that work?
Generally not. So generally the lender in this case is going to select the appraiser. And if your lender is selling loans to the secondary market, which most lenders are, then they're going to have a list that they work off of, and there's some rotation of that list. So typically a lender is not going to use the same appraiser for all assignments, but that lender is going to select the appraiser or appraisers that would complete that assignment.
Well, and I guess that begs the question, I've heard about these appraisal management companies and things like that. Are lenders sometimes utilizing their services to select those appraisers?
Absolutely. So appraisal management companies have become very popular in the last decade or so as a third-party vendor to basically outsource the appraisal process for the lender. So in that case, the AMC, the appraisal management company, has a panel of appraisers that then bid on appraisal work or appraisal opportunities that come about in the market areas that they serve.
And what sometimes I hear back and feedback from agents sometimes is that they don't have this, and I guess the lender in that case, who is the appraiser working for at that point?
Typically, the appraiser is the lender's agent, or the client is the lender. So again, because that appraiser is providing an assurance of value for this mortgage finance transaction, the lender is who the client is. Now, not to say, in like your cash deal example we were talking about before, a buyer could engage that appraiser directly, or a seller could engage an appraiser directly if they're looking for an opinion value on a piece
Before they market it?
Yeah, before they market the property.
Okay. Well, another question that I think that comes up from time to time with licensees and agents and the public, can I just use the assessor's assessment as a value for the property? And, and I know that there are certain things that come into play when we talk about a federally related transaction, which means that there's going to be money borrowed on the property and those kind of things. But, it seems like the assessor, that's what, they're assessing property, they're putting a value on it, so that can't be used.
Correct. So, property assessment actually is a form of appraisal. That's called mass appraisal, but they serve two entirely different purposes. Assessment is intended to set a value for taxation purposes for a property. Appraisal is entirely different. So the assessor, most of the time, for one, doesn't have as much information as the appraiser will, because in most cases, the assessor has not been inside the home. Additionally, assessment is only done in most townships on a 4-year period. So there's a lot that could have happened in 4 years. So assessed value and market value tend to be very different things. Now, there are instances where those values may be very close, but we find in a lot of instances the assessed value and the market value of the home are quite different.
Okay. So now that begs, I know that you use a lot of the same data and things to provide an appraisal, but how is that different than what a real estate licensee does for a comparative market analysis or, a broker price opinion, BPO? How are they different?
Sure. So I do like to think that there are similarities in that process. We're both using, we both have access to similar data sets, right? The appraiser certainly doesn't have access to anything that the realtor doesn't, besides some of the things that they'll do at the property that we're going to talk about. But I like to think of a CMA as an agent process. That's something that an agent does. Mm-hmm. And an appraisal, that's more of a bank or a lender process, right? So an appraisal is completed by a state licensed appraiser. A CMA is completed by an agent, and typically speaking, that's to establish a listing price or an offer price that's used as a reference point for buyer and seller.
Pricing information.
Pricing information,
That's
exactly,
what I like
just
to
as
call
you
it.
said. They're used for similar situations, but the appraisal has to be USPAP compliant. And USPAP is the Uniform Standards and Principles of the Appraisal Practice. So it is the strict set of guidelines set forth not only by USPAP, but also by state licensing and the secondary market, typically, Fannie Mae and
Okay,
Freddie Mac.
who sets those standards?
Well, typically the Appraisal Qualifications Board, that has to do with
that's
at a
federal, right?
It's at a federal level, right? So what's included and how that appraisal is prepared is subject to those guidelines.
Now, aren't they the AQB? They are kind of a subset of the Reserve, aren't they? The bank, or the Reserve Bank, or something to do with that? Or-
You've got FIREA.
Federal Reserve.
Yep. You've got FIREA in there, and you've also got regulation at the federal level to where what it takes to be an appraiser, and also what is included for appraisals that meet secondary market
Okay,
guidelines.
and what I kind of understand about that process is that there is a federal law that sets forth these standards for the Federal Reserve and FIREA and everything else, and then they pass those regulations or those standards down to the states. The states are the ones that actually license then the appraiser to meet those standards as set by the federal government. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. And they're also the ones responsible for enforcing it.
Yes, that the states are.
The state is.
Right. And part of my past was being a regulator in real estate, and I remember that we would then have audits or examinations by auditors from the Federal Reserve that would come in and basically examine our appraisal program to make sure that it met those standards. Sure. So, and it's all related back then to the fact that if somebody is getting a loan, a mortgage loan on a house or a property, then that's where those guidelines, because they're all most banking institutions are insured by the FDIC. So that's where that all kind of comes into play, and it's all tied together. If I'm not, so there, that's part of the difference then too, I think, right? Because then with these standards, don't you then, well, you're using the same data, you may have to prepare your report in such a way that it meets those standards.
Certainly that it meets those standards.
It can't be like Norm sitting there, oh, well, that house over there sold for blank. Yeah, that's pretty close. I'll use that.
Yeah, we'll just use that number.
Yeah,
Exactly.
we'll use that number. And if you're representing the seller or the buyer, then, you know, that could be sway your thoughts a little bit. But you actually apply how do you do
methodology,
a methodology.
right?
That's the word I was looking for. So,
And recognized practices then to determine the value of that property.
because part of that process is too that, you know, your appraisal reports are subject to audit by the state licensing through IDFPR, and they can take a look at yours, and then they have a board that looks at them and said, hey,
This is not USPAP compliant.
right, yeah.
Absolutely.
So those all come into play, and
Absolutely.
I think, yeah. So now that the lender has contacted you and they have given you an assignment for an appraisal, you go out and you do your appraisal. When and how, or who should expect to see that appraisal report, or how's that?
Yeah, so
How's that process
typically
work?
Yeah, so typically once that appraisal report is prepared, it's going to be delivered to the lender. And what a client should expect to see in that appraisal report may be a little different than the CMA, but certainly we're going to see details about the property. Now that's things about, you know, everything from the size of the subject property, you know, where it's located, whether or not it's got encumbrances against the property. And then,
So you actually do if you want to call that some research on the actual title of it
absolutely,
as well.
Absolutely, from a public, you know, what's
Yep.
available in public record standpoint. You're going to see a side-by-side comparison of similar properties, both oftentimes properties that have been sold recently, and then also so that you can see how that property relates to things that are currently actively marketed or pending properties as well.
Okay.
So that's in the side-by-side comparison. You'll see an evaluation of that of the market. So where that property is located, its neighborhood, not only the characteristics, but what's going on in that market. Is it in a declining home values, or is there an appreciation of home values taking place in that market area? The appraiser will also describe any significant issues or problems that they would see with that property or its location, the lot it's on, things like that, or if there is any significant updating or remodeling that's been done to that property as well.